Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rob Mancini. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the District of Columbia.
Good afternoon. I'm Keith St. Clair. I'm the Director of Communications for the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety and Justice. So you know, I've been in this job for a year and a half, and before that, for 25 years, I was a journalist. So I come at this from the other side of seeking the information.
Good afternoon. I'm Darrell Reed. I'm Deputy CTO for Octo and Interim Chief Data Officer for the District of Columbia.
Okay, at this point, I'll call the roll to determine the existence of a quorum. The advisory group consists of 15 members, thus the presence of 8 members constitutes a quorum. Rob Mancini?
Present.
Darrell Reed?
Present.
Robert Becker?
Present.
Justin Grimes? Catherine Pettit?
Present.
Tracy Hughes?
Present.
David Zvinich?
Present.
Aisha Abbasi?
Present.
Myself, present. Rachel Joseph?
Present.
Ariel Levinson Waldman?
Present.
David Singh?
Present.
Keith St. Clair?
Present.
Okay, there are 2 members absent. One of them I know had an unexpected event, but in any event, there are 13 members and we do have a quorum. The first item of business today is the adoption of bylaws to govern the advisory group. The bylaws, draft bylaws were distributed in advance and they should be in your folder. And I will go through them briefly just to sort of highlight what's contained in the bylaws. Article 1 is the name of the group. The advisory group shall exist only during such times as it may be meeting in the presence of a quorum. The purposes and duties are defined in the Mayor's Order 2014-250, which established this group. Please note that the purposes statement in the bylaws and in the order is not exclusive, so there are things that can be added if the members feel that they need to be added. So this lists 12 or so different duties. The membership again is determined by the Mayor's Order. Meetings, all meetings are open to the public except as otherwise permitted. I don't anticipate that this group will be having any shade meetings or closed meetings. All our meetings will be in the sunshine. Number 2, Article 3, number 2, meetings shall be held at times and places specified by the group. This just says there shall be 4 meetings a year. The exact number of meetings will be determined by the anticipated workload of the group. Does anybody want to change that in any way? It's a fairly general statement. Number 3, the chairperson shall endeavor to limit meetings to approximately 2 hours. Any issues with that? Let's see. Article 4, officer and member responsibilities. This is one area where there's a mention of a vice president, but there's no real mechanism to appoint a vice president. My thinking is that the group would appoint a vice chairperson, if it felt the need to do so. Member responsibilities is you're expected to attend meetings and participate in the activities. The agenda, this is generally just the order of business for each meeting. One thing that I would note is that there is set aside a portion of each meeting for the public to comment, hopefully on matters that are on the agenda, but they're not completely restricted to that. I think that is all, other than the provision that deals with how to amend the bylaws, and it's fairly standard, 2 weeks notice and a 2/3 vote. Any questions on the bylaws? Any recommended changes? No. Yes, Ron?
I have just one item that I was looking at under Article 1.
Okay.
Specifically item number 12, where it says specifically on line 2 there, to create an open government dashboard. I think if we've invested that in the Office of the Chief Technology Officer, it would be good for us to do the following, I think, to try not to create services, but ask Octo to create them based upon our advice. I think if we start creating things and Octo's creating them at the same time, we may run the risk of creating some confusion. So that's something I think we ought to think about rather than create.
I just don't see it. Where is it at? Where are we looking?
It's on page 2, item 12. I think it's great for us to provide advice and lots of input there, but I think if we should settle on 1 or 2 repositories. I know Vega would like to have one as well. Makes a lot of sense.
I concur.
Yeah, Tracy?
I concur.
So we want to change this language on page 2, line 20, where it says, or create an open government dashboard. What are the recommendations on that? Just to recommend that Octo create it?
Advise on the creations.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And that's all I had, Mr. Chairman.
There any objection or opposition to this change?
No, I think it's sensible. I would just add one little tweak. I think Rob makes a terrific suggestion. If we're going to do it, we might as well. This is a little change, but change the or so that we can do both.
Okay.
We don't have to choose between publishing and advising. And so that ought to say and or.
So then the provision in Article 1, number 12 would read, the chairperson of the advisory group shall publish the evaluation and recommendations on the Open Government web portal and advise.
I'll say and or just to maintain the flexibility.
And or advise Octo on the creation on an open government dashboard that will provide the public with both graphic and narrative evaluation information. Okay.
Mr. Chair, I have another
Mr. Becker?
suggestion. I believe that the Open Government Office should be up there with the mayor and Octo in making a lot of these decisions. And I think that should be changed to include the director in these decisions.
So, and advise Octo and the director of the Office of Open Government?
Yes.
Rob, do you have any comments on that?
I think it's reasonable. Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, can somebody read to me what the change would read like?
Well, I guess one of them is in recommend to the mayor, the chief technology officer, and the director of the office of Open.
Yeah, I think I was unclear on that. So we're not on 12 any longer.
Well, okay, I think that the director of the Office of Open Government should be involved in all of these decisions because there's input of value from the office on how the systems are designed and how they should work in relation to the agency. So I think it's going to be it's an issue that goes through all of the functions, and
Well, then it looks like in part you're on number 6. You know, the lead-in language, so that it covers everything that follows. Well, that's not right. That's only A, B, C, D. Shall include. Where else did you identify it?
well, one place is in E, recommend the functions of.
Which, there's no.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I'm looking at.
You're looking at the order, the draft right there. It's right there.
Oh, this.
Yeah, we're on the bylaws.
Well, it certainly is in 6. And
are you proposing are you recommending adding a section E?
No, I'm sorry, I was looking at the, I don't know if that's a different topic.
Let me try to capture what your thought is. You want recommendations that this group makes to go to the Director of OOG in addition to anyone else?
In addition to the OCTO and mayor, yes.
Okay. Any objection or questions or concerns about that?
So that's that's 6.
It's 6, but it may appear other places, but I don't think it would be difficult to make that conforming change. Right. I think I understand that.
No objections, and I'm confident that either way, Ms. Hughes will be fully informed of our
I'll insert myself.
recommendations.
But it's nice to have it ready.
Okay. Okay, so I will make those conforming changes, circulate the changes, but I'm going to treat that as us having adopted the changes as necessary. Okay. I mean, if we can proceed without formal votes and by consensus, I prefer to do that. But so is there consensus that we do that? I haven't heard any objection. Okay. Yeah, I guess we should do that formally, even though we did that by consensus. So no further comments on the bylaws. All those in favor of the adopting the bylaws as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Done. Yeah, it's probably the last formal vote today. Okay, the next item on the agenda is just to examine the role of this committee, try to determine a work plan, schedules, and our next steps. The advisory group's charge is fairly broad. However, given the circumstances in which we find ourselves, I think it would be prudent to determine what we can accomplish in the short term and what would be better left to a longer-term approach. One question could be whether to divide the work into committees to identify issues and prioritize those issues, or simply address, as I said, what could be done in the short term. For discussion purposes, I have lifted what I think are some of the topics, and you're free to add or subtract as you see fit. I'm just finished this really a few minutes ago, but I do have copies also for the audience. Anybody who's interested. Oh, okay.
So Brian, I just have one question. Is this matrix broken down according to what's already been accomplished per the directive? And
No. These are items that are in the directive or in the bylaws. And for example, I saw four categories of topics. Proactive disclosure is identification of categories and types of information that should be regularly posted online. Open data, identification of data sets, protected data, updating, archiving, and revising terms and conditions applicable to district data. Open government reports, evaluating and providing recommendations on improving the content and format of those reports. And then webcasting of meetings, recommendations on which boards and commissions to prioritize, and also examination of best practices, technology, and methods. There are a couple of other recommendations at the end of this that I didn't think necessarily fell neatly into these four categories. I received actually from members here, and you'll see those at the end of the matrix. So looking at the matrix, I have reference number 1 through 11, and those are not in any kind of priority. Those are just in the order of how they were listed on in the directive or in the bylaws. What I would like for us to do is look at these topics, decide if we definitely will be addressing them, or whether they're short-term, long-term, and then to prioritize. You'll see the different categories at the top, how to implement, possible project leads, and this is just, kind of throwing some of this out there. administrative challenges, legal challenges, financial impact, timeline, and the current status. It's really, again, I'm putting it out here for discussion in terms of how this committee goes about doing its work. Comments?
Well, I think I can speak to the open government reports because I had the task of combining all of them and had to do it in a very quick and rudimentary fashion. And that was just simply combining the PDF files. I think that if we can come up with a better organization of those reports, and I don't know what the best means of doing that is at this moment. I'd like some recommendations on like the software, the technology to use. But I think short term, and that can be done relatively easily, if we can just find a way to better organize those reports to the benefit of all of us in the room and for the general public.
On the Open Government Advisory Group website that I put together, I was able to convert all the PDFs into HTML and actually into plain text, so that you can actually look at the plain text without having it in PDF. But it actually would be helpful to have it as a Word document as well, because part of the problem is that you lose some of the formatting, you lose some of the quality when it's converted from PDF into text. So to the extent that we have them in the original digital format, that'd be helpful.
Okay, so I can identify those, and I guess, Brian, between you and I, we can identify those agencies that submitted only PDFs. I can tell you with a reasonable degree of certainty that I'd say about 95% of the reports that I have, I received in Word and converted to PDF. So we're almost there. But that addresses the coding community and people who are familiar with GitHub. What is the recommendation for the placement of the reports in a general repository on a regular site?
They're on the website. They're actually not in GitHub. They're to be viewed as like a website. So you can actually just click on the website and all of them are there. And you can click directly into HTML or into PDF.
What is the URL?
It's opengovadvisorygroupdc.github.io. And it's under the documents link.
Let me just say also, this list is not exclusive. I know there are members who are interested in legislative proposals. That's something that probably should be added to the list. And then the question is, how do you parse that? Do you break that up and then categorize that? But Rob Becker.
Yeah, this list is very data-centric. And I think that the mandate of this group should be to look at all of the transparency, open meetings, open records, in the FOIA sense, as well as open data and technology. And so I think that there are several things we should include in this list.
That's why you're here.
and I think you are correct. I think there are a number of legislative issues. They are clearly going to be long-term because they have to take place in the next council period or longer, but they need to be on.
So again, I invite anyone to add to this list, and it doesn't, obviously, you're not going to necessarily do it at this meeting, but between now, we're going to meet again in 2 weeks. One thing I'd like to figure out is what we might be able to accomplish in the 2-week period, and there's probably some of the short-term items that I've identified here.
I'd like to make one suggestion, if I could, Mr. Chairman. Typically, in an advisory group, there's a period of time that goes by, and after which the advisory group turns in a report on a list of their findings and the status of open government. And it's a good product to have as a result of the work that we've done. I think given how recent our foray into a lot of the open government initiatives for this government that we have here, I think we ought to probably wait about 6 months, but we probably should produce something in 6 months as to the state of open government in the district. And we can make that as centric as we want. But I didn't see that in the list, Mr. Flowers. I thought that might be a good idea as a work product for the group.
That is an excellent idea. Now, I think that is in the charge, in the order. There's no time frame on it, though. And another question is, will it be one report or several reports? For example, the two things that I have listed as short-term, They are evaluating and providing recommendations on the open government reports, and then under webcasting, recommending which boards and commissions should be prioritized for webcasting. And this would be, for example, probably what sometimes are referred to as the major boards, the regulatory type of boards. So should we do a report on that? And since it's a short-term item, as opposed to trying to do one large report, I mean, that would be another consideration.
The other thing that I think might be a really good short-term report, given the circumstances we're in, is a catalog of where we are. So that even just having a list of what agencies are, or what boards and commissions are broadcasting, what data sets are agencies actually doing, in addition to the government report, the agency reports that exist. But when we go through this matrix, identifying sort of what the state of play is, so that we can organize our work.
Tracy?
So perhaps what we can do once we identify some of these short-term issues, we just place them into buckets, being open meetings, FOIA, and then open data. Maybe that would be easier for the group just to separate them and to tackle them one by one.
Okay. Rob?
I have one more comment, and then I promise I'll be quiet. Number 10 in the matrix,
Yes.
where we call out open source software. There are a variety of software licensing models that I don't think we would want to limit ourselves to open source. There are lots of different crowdsource opportunities that we have, so maybe we could change that to external sources of software. And that gives us the ability to work with the public and civic-minded technologists who might want to help us develop certain tools that we might not realize we could use. Open source is a little bit limiting technically. It doesn't really open it up to alternative sources other than that which is free. And we might have good public-private partnership opportunities to develop tools that other cities have developed, and we might have to pay a fee for that.
Kathy? Reading your mind.
Oh, yeah. So I think I'm just not sure that open source means free necessarily, because there's still cost I know involved in it. But so for other external sources, do you mean
either for fee or without? I just didn't want it to
So-
imply free.
so-
I don't want people to see that as free.
So there is a
We're
distinction.
willing to pay for something.
There is a distinction between FOSS software and Libra software and open source software generally. So FOSS software is exactly what you're talking about, free open source software, and a lot of open source is free, but a lot of open source software is not free. And I think that, I'm not sure what the specific licensing models that you're considering are, but I think there's value in trying to think about how the government can actually do more, both creating open source technologies and contributing to open source platforms that exist. We're seeing at the federal government, for instance, that the United States Digital Services recommended going open source as a primary vehicle, and 18F is, the GSA is taking this on as their mission, or the cause celeb. So I think that it should not be restrictive. It should be open source and other transparent. You said community license, but I'm not sure what that is. But I would not want to see open source taken away. I'd want to see it additive as opposed to reductive.
Yeah, I'm with you there, and Dave. I want to make sure that that's open enough so that the term of art to expand that. I think we have the same idea.
Okay, so on that one, then the language would change slightly so that it's more inclusive. Since we're on that number 10, where would we place this in terms of the timeline? It's certainly, I don't think it's a short-term issue.
That's a long term.
Yeah.
That's a long term.
I mean, that's one of those ongoing kinds of things.
Okay.
Never-ending project.
One thing that we aren't operating in a vacuum. There are open source policies that exist in the federal government and other state governments. So we're not operating totally from scratch. We should think about how it actually fits in the district's ecosystem. But I don't want to give the impression that this is completely foreign to what governments are doing. There's a lot of internationally and locally. There are a number of governments that are moving explicitly in open source policies.
Okay, so then I'd really like to just go down this list fairly quickly. And I mean, we can certainly assign it to one of the three categories: open meetings, FOIA, open data. I mean, either way we do it. Number one, proactive disclosure, identification of new categories and types of information to be posted online. Assume this is FOIA. I've got this as medium term, not something that we're going to be able to accomplish in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Any recommendations as to a possible lead agency or how we would accomplish this?
So, in order to answer this question, I guess we'd have to make a determination as who's going to be in charge of identifying, based upon a review of the open government reports, identifying those agencies that may have some of the easiest or medium or most problematic informational records that they have to contend with. Because, for example, DCRA is one agency, they may have like a lot of blueprints and other things. They may have to be digitized, which would require recommendations in this regard as it relates to proactive disclosure, but may require some recommendations as to technology. So I would recommend that we take a look at the agencies themselves that have submitted the reports, figure out the easiest ones, and then take a stab at the harder ones, which...
So that would be prioritizing this by agency then?
Well, there might be a different way, another way to do it, or a combined way, which is we have Section 2-536, which affirmatively requires all agencies to publish certain kinds of data, information online. The question is, are there other categories of information we can identify that should also be published online that aren't now encompassed by the statute? So it's both a agency by agency question and a type of record question. So,
Okay.
well, what would be useful? The Open Government Coalition has advocated that agencies affirmatively put online things that they get frequent requests for, which may be all kinds of information, but clearly is not now covered by 5-236.
And I know that's something that's not defined, frequently requested record. I know that there's a proposal in the federal FOIA amendment to make it if it's requested 3 times, then it's a frequently requested record.
And we may ultimately need legislation to fix that. But the point is, right now, we can start trying to define what some of those things might be.
So perhaps this is where the open government liaisons that were identified several months ago can come into play. Perhaps we can ask them to inform us as to what are some of those records that we know what they proactively disclosed, because in theory everything should be up on their open government tabs. But if there's some records that they find problematic in disclosing, which they know that they should, but because of whatever limitations, whether it be by technology or manpower, they're unable to do so in short order.
Just go through a little quicker. Number 2, this is another one, I guess it is FOIA. This is under proactive disclosure, whether we should review the terms and conditions for information that's published online. This is not data, this is other information, because one of the tasks is to look at the terms and conditions that apply to data. This would be information that is something other than data. Again, not short term. And we know that OAG will have to weigh in on this sort of recommended change.
One question that I did have, I know that the terms and conditions were posted a couple of weeks ago, and they're up on the website, but there are still, to my mind, issues about how it's drafted. And I wasn't sure if this entity is going to be sort of taking the charge of looking at that and tweaking it, or whether that's still in the works within OAG and or whoever else was involved.
Well, I think both. This group will certainly make recommendations that it thinks are in the public interest and that would promote transparency and open government. But again, that's numbers that,
I mean, I do think that OAG and EUM are,
number 6.
they are the right entities to make some of to at least take this on as a lead. But I wasn't sure what the scope is. Is it sort of again, in the longer term category, is this, we need to get this done right now for what's online, or is it for what are we doing 3 months from now, 6 months from now?
Yeah, because I think we were prioritizing data, obviously, because we were rolling out the new data sets. And I mean, speaking of that, we do have a presentation that's going to be made today, and I see that the people are in the room now. Is there any objection to having them make their presentation, and then we'll just kind of come back to this agenda and proceed? No. Okay. So we're gonna just take a quick break so that Chris Murphy and Tim Abdella can get set up.
Okay, great. Terrific. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and meeting of the advisory group. I was thinking about this. It's a little bit meta for us to explain the mayor's open government initiative to the Open Government Advisory Group. But despite that, that sort of amusing notion, I thought we'd probably just want to make sure you all have a baseline understanding of kind of where we are and where we've come from. I guess first, on behalf of the mayor, I want to say thank you to everyone for your willingness to step up and do this in addition to your other daily jobs. I know the mayor had a chance to swear most of you in personally a couple weeks ago, so I know you heard from him directly, but I also want to just echo his thanks. And we do think this is something really important. Open government is something, kind of a broad concept, as everyone knows, that we've been working on in a bunch of different ways over the last couple of years, kind of culminating to today, which we're very excited about to have you all together for the first time. So if I can, let me just go ahead and walk you through some of the key initiatives that we've undertaken that kind of add up to our overall effort on open government. And before I do this, I also just want to say, like pretty much every major accomplishment of the Gray administration, it has been an extraordinary team effort that has gotten us this far. Many of you are in this room that have made it possible. Some folks are not, but Octo has been a terrific partner. Rob, you and your team, and Tim, Michael Black and others, the city administrator's office. It's just been a really great team effort to get us to where we are today. So with that said, let me just go ahead and kick right in. So as you all know, and I'm sure your chair has discussed, the mayor issued the July mayor's order that created, among other things, created this task force. It also put some very concrete things into place that we're excited about. Among other things, it requires every agency to issue an open government report for that agency. And I am pleased to say today that we have 65 of the agencies are compliant with their open government report, have it online. I think there are 2 that are not yet compliant, and we're working very closely with them to get them up, get their plans up in the very near future. So we've made good progress on that so far. I would say that the template that we used for this report was fairly modest because the executive order that was issued in July didn't give folks a lot of time when the mayor's order required the plans be due every October 1st. So we weren't able to give folks a lot of time. We put a fairly basic template out there. One of our requests of you all, as you meet in the coming months, is that you look at that template and tweak it, and that our request is that you all take ownership over that report and start issuing it and telling agencies what you think they need to be sharing, with at the same time being cognizant of not making people do work for work's sake. I mean, we want to have a balance between not creating onerous compliance requirements that people can't meet, but we also want to make sure we're getting the right amount of information out there. So we hope that you will wrestle with that question. So let me just talk for a second about sort of, we're calling this kind of our suite of open government initiatives, all of these things combining to this ethic of open government that we're really trying to adopt here in the district. And the first one I want to start with is open.dc.gov. So this was something that was mandated in the mayor's order, and we'd been working to get it online at this, that we took it live the same time the mayor's order came out. So why we say to folks, if you remember one thing from this presentation, please remember open.dc.gov. This is kind of the hub of the district's open government approach, where you can find links to everything we hope you might need, as well as FOIA requests. And I'll talk about that in a second. But you can see it's got links to Track DC, which you'll see in a moment, the One City Action Plan, grade.dc.gov, the sustainability dashboard. It's got a link to the mayor's order. It's got a link to open data, DC regulations in the DC Register, and on and on. So, the budget information. So all of that's there, linked to contract and procurement, so people have access to P cards. This is a one-stop shop. If you go there, you should be able to find what you're looking for from here. Also tells a little bit about what agencies are required to put up online. And as I think folks know, at the same time, every agency made sure it has its own open government and FOIA page that kind of echoes some of the material here and links back to it. So the next sort of piece of the puzzle here, or sort of component of the suite of initiatives, is foia.dc.gov. And this is also something we launched earlier this year. We had some modest technical difficulties to get it launched. We had to figure out, first of all, where the data was going to reside, and we had to work through some things with the contractor. But we were able to get that resolved, work with the agencies to get them used to the initiative, and then took it live in July. And so far, we're seeing really good success. It is, as I think folks know, the first district-wide FOIA system ever in our history. For the first time ever, folks can go to one place and submit a FOIA request. They can use the website to track their requests. And the other thing we're very excited about is it creates reading rooms for agencies, so that we're really encouraging agencies to, when they respond to a FOIA request, we're really encouraging them to put that information in the reading room, so that if another citizen comes along, or a journalist or whomever, and wants access to that information, they don't have to ask again. They can just go and find it in the reading room. So it's saving everybody time and effort. The good news on that, we've run the numbers. Since July, 829 requests have been submitted on FOIA Express, and with 113 documents in the various reading rooms of the different agencies. So we're starting to see pretty good adoption of it, and agencies are kind of working through their own processes and kinks for how to make sure they're using it most efficiently. Let's see. It also, I would say, it gives us a little bit more of a window into agencies' compliance with the FOIA timelines that are in there. So I think it's going to be helpful for reporting purposes and for management of FOIA compliance. It's going to give us a better window into that process and compliance. So the next piece, and I hope that folks have some familiarity with grade.dc.gov. It's powered by the software of a local technology company, New Brand Analytics. Their traditional clients are the hospitality industry, so hotel and restaurant chains. The mayor went and visited them several years ago and kind of came back and was just telling me he was so excited about what they were doing, and it was so great that they were a local district company. And he said, wouldn't it be cool if we had something like that for the district government? I said to him, are you serious about that? And he said, you know what, I am. Let's ask them if they can do it. So we've contracted with them to create a similar product for the 15 most public-facing DC government agencies. What it does, and here's the grade.dc.gov is what we call it, it also happens to be the website, so it's also easy to remember. You can see from the October grade, it produces monthly grades. Our October grade as a government is an A. And I would say to those of you who worry that maybe this is on a curve, we use the same scoring system and rubric that the private sector uses. So the same hotel chain clients and restaurant chain clients use the same scoring mechanism. We're not giving ourselves any kind of break on that. So how does it work? Hopefully folks have some familiarity with it. It allows New Brand Analytics, our independent partner, so we don't touch the grades. They are the ones who create the grades for us. It allows people to submit feedback to the DC government. They can do that in a couple different ways. As you can see here, about 56% or half of the feedback we're getting is from online surveys. So if you go to grade.dc.gov, you'll see this website that shows you how to submit your feedback about any one of those 15 most public-facing agencies. Alternatively, or in addition, New Brand Analytics is mining social media for any kind of reference to these agencies. And as you can see, about a little less than half, 44% of the feedback that New Brand Analytics is collecting is from social media. Most of that is Twitter, but we also get some Facebook, some Foursquare, some Yelp, and some other smaller sites as well. So it's really trying to capture an impression of what the public is thinking as best we can using the tools of social media and online feedback. Each month, agencies are issued a grade. You can see those listed here. Those are the October grades. And the other piece that's very valuable is that in addition to getting a monthly grade, agencies also get they get a daily email that is a kind of an amalgam of their comments that have been expressed about them on Twitter and through the online surveys. So there's kind of almost real-time feedback that directors and others in the agencies are able to get about their agencies. So and it's led to us making some changes around things. We've had stories. It's sort of funny that some of the seniors at our senior centers have indicated that certain meals they didn't like, and they've let us know that. And so we saw it on social media, and we changed it. So Office on Aging went in and they talked to their contractors, and they said our seniors are telling us they don't like that meal. Change it up, and they have. So that's just one of many examples of some of the kinds of feedback that's being internalized and changes made to reflect. I'd also point out that since the launch of the program, over 40,000 reviews have been submitted either on Twitter or these surveys, and each review typically has a couple different what we call insights into the agency. So there might be a comment on the facilities, there might be a content on the services, there might be a comment on the customer service. When you have a couple different comments, you often get multiple insights per review. So over 161,000 insights. We've also gotten quite a bit of national recognition. I mean, interestingly, I think we've gotten more national recognition for our leadership on grade.dc than we probably have locally. The Wall Street Journal did a profile of it. Governing Magazine has done a profile of it. And there's a new book written by two Harvard professors, one of whom is Steve Goldsmith, the former mayor of Indianapolis, called The Responsive City. And so he profiles grade.dc.gov as an innovative way that cities are listening to their residents using some of the tools that social media allows. So next two items, data.dc.gov and track.dc.gov. In just a second, I'm going to ask Tim to come up and present those. These were two new websites, or in some cases actually not necessarily new, but kind of updated and refreshed websites in pretty dramatic ways that provide the public and anyone interested in some basic data around DC, and the track.dc.gov takes some of that data and makes it easier to digest. When we announced this just a couple weeks ago, Octo also added 237 new data sets. Our goal in the mayor's order was we hoped to have 15 new data sets by the rollout. Octo chuckled when we told them that was our goal. They kind of smiled and said, I think we can meet that, and then came up with 237. So we're really pleased with the ambition there, and I know they're adding. I have a feeling that number may be even maybe higher today. So Tim Abdella from Octo, let me ask you to come on up and give folks a quick tour of what's up there now on data.dc.gov and track.dc.gov. Made a mess for you. It's okay.
Thanks, Chris. On behalf of Octo and Director Mancini Dervel, my boss, I'm extremely happy to present to you what we've been working on at Octo for quite some time. We got it done by the first week of October, but we were working on it for several months leading up to it, from the mayor's order to when we had it ready. Let me see if I can get out of the PowerPoint presentation here and get to a browser. It's always difficult to do this with my head cocked. Look at that, the site's already open. So we revamped data.dc.gov and created a new site, and it's still data.dc.gov. It also utilizes the URL opendata.dc.gov. So you can get to it from either place. And it's ultimately a website that allows you to search, discover, explore, find data. And then once you have access to that data, you can download it or utilize it through APIs to be able to build applications. There's also some rudimentary tools on the site right now for charting, graphing, and working with the data directly on the site. This is a new site, so it has many improvements that will happen to it over the years, but it's a really good starting point. As Chris mentioned, we switched the data sources of the data from what was traditionally the citywide data warehouse that ran the data.dc.gov site to the new site. And the new site's really powered from the GIS source database, and we're now collaborating to work and blend the citywide data warehouse content and the GIS data warehouse content together, and then that will form the foundation for the open data database content moving forward as one single system to share both geospatial and non-geospatial content. I always like to argue that it'd be hard to find any content in the District of Columbia that's not geospatial, because it's about DC, not about Abu Dhabi or someplace else. But that's for another discussion. So from here, you can use this site to search, discover, and use content. We have it broken down into different groupings: administrative boundaries or cultural boundaries or environmental data. So if you're to click on one of these without doing any sort of search, it's going to give you a pre-list of results. So there's 201 data sets that deal with environmental data as we've tagged it. Can we argue? Of course. But we're taking the best guess at tagging the stuff. So here's energy information on buildings and floodplains and toxic release inventory data set and green sites. And any one of these data sets you can play with, you can look at, you can download directly right from here, a spreadsheet, a KML, a shapefile. You can go to the API. You can go to the API and say, give it to me as a GeoJSON file. JSON is the language used by the internet to build applications. So you just grab that URL and start working with the data. Often you want to know more information about the data, so you can click on it and it'll give you more information about that data set. You can get tables and you can get charts and other information. I want to work with a data set that I'm familiar with working with. So I'm going to go and do a quick search for public school data. I have children in the public school system here in the district. And as the lottery is approaching, this will become popular information to have. And this data helps feed the My Schools application, which is just recently launched within EOM. So we are using the dog fooding technique. It's a common phrase used in our industry where we are eating from the same dish that we're serving everybody else. And we want to make sure it tastes good for ourselves, so that everyone else. And I'll show you another example of that with the track.dc.gov. But here's an example of data that I found. So here's public schools. There's 26 attributes, 115 rows. Let me click on that. Sometimes we don't need the map. The map's nice to have, but we don't need it necessarily. So there's the data on the public schools. We can see what the source is. We can read some metadata on it. We can see what the licensing is. If I click on the licensing, for example, the license that we were able to release on October 28th of this year was a new terms and conditions for data, this is specific for data, not for the entire website, that allowed us to go into the public domain. So this is a huge move. Huge. We're the first city in the country to do this. The federal government hasn't done this yet. They're moving towards wanting to do this, but we beat them to the punch a little bit. So what this says is our data, unless there's some other licensing restrictions that stop us from doing so, is now in the public domain, which means people can use it for whatever they want to use it for, and they don't even have to provide attribution back to the district for it. Now, we ask them that attribution is used. What's going on here? We ask them attribution is used because we believe attribution provides that authoritative notion of where the data came from, and it helps foster the open data community because people will know where they got the data from so they can go get the data themselves to do their own projects. But it's not a requirement. And you can read more about the Creative Commons public domain designation, which we call CC level 0, if you want to. But back to the actual data. Now that I know that I can use the data in any way that I want to, how might I use this data? Well, it gives me a bunch of different attribute columns that I can use the data with. I can actually work with the table itself right online. That should come right up quick. Oh, sorry about that. And this actually has, tables of information, just like we'd expect from any data set. It's got the name of the school, the address, the use, the type of level, or it's an elementary, high school, etc., phone number, and we can filter and work with this data on different stuff. So maybe we want to look at the total number of students in schools. So one of the things I can do is use my little slider bar to look at the number of students, and then it filters and tells me how many of the rows or the records meet that criteria. If I type in 399 here, anyone know the significance of 399? It's not a quiz, but it was that librarians were only allowed in schools with over 400 students in it. So this starts to designate the 78 public schools in the district that wouldn't have librarians because the budgets were cut to remove those librarians from schools smaller than 400 students. Another big issue. But this is the way that we can use this data to start to explore this. Now I can download that whole data set like we looked at before, or that subset of data set. So if I only want to work with that subset, I can do the queries and download that data set right here. If we look at the API for this, and if I copy that out, I'm going to show you something that you in this room probably won't ever use again, but the development community will. This is the actual JSON for this service. So people can use their applications, they can build applications, mobile applications, web applications, and get direct access to all that data. And that's the power of that JSON. And that's the language that's used on the web today, ubiquitously to share data. And so that's fully supported. It's pretty awesome. Well, I might not know any of that stuff, and I may want to work with this data right here in this application because I might not have another one to work in. So I can go to my Charts tab, and live demonstrations, right? Spinning. So what I should be able to do is take this data and chart and graph it, and it works for me all the time except for I'm up in front of you. Now let's say this data set changes, right? So new school tendency data comes in, and we update the data. You can actually subscribe to an RSS feed of this data, and you'll get notified every time that data set gets updated. You can also subscribe to the entire data catalog, which means you'll get notified quite often. But you can subscribe to a single data set. So let's go back at this chart. So I have a bar chart here of information that, I don't know, may not, probably not the best use of a bar chart here. So maybe I want to look at facility use. Still not the best chart in my opinion, but it kind of gives me the type of schools that are here. So I could switch that to a donut chart. That's a much easier chart to read. Shows me a number of elementary schools and the percentages for the other types of campuses. But I can also take and organize that data or sum that data by maybe the capacity of each, of each school. And now I can see the number of elementary schools, and then the capacity shows up in that little dialog. So just neat ways to play with the data and slice and dice it. If I scroll down, there's a little embed chart and a little styling thing, so I can adjust it. And now we're still using that subset of data that are less than 400. But I can embed that chart there. So that's an example of using that open data site and getting access to a ton of data. And we're going to be growing that. There was some discussion around working with the data coordinators. Absolutely. We have a program going on at Octo where we're going to bring in our data coordinator liaisons and work with the data coordinators from each of the agencies to begin to identify their data, the low-hanging fruit data. There's a lot of data that exists just in PDF format. That if we can find out the source of the PDF, we can publish a whole bunch of new data. And then we'll work with them on the more difficult data sets that exist. So how can we actually use this data to build a more sophisticated web application? So we did that by rebuilding track.dc.gov. track.dc.gov utilizes the content and the information coming from that site around budgetary information and contracts and that sort of stuff. So from here, we've got the agencies divided into the groupings as defined by the budget. So economic development, government direction, human support, public. We thought this was a good way of dividing agencies into groups because it transfers from administration to administration. So let's look at one of these. FEMS, I always pick on FEMS. So this is Fire Emergency Medical Services. It gives us a description of what that agency is. It allows us to link right to their website or ask the director or follow them on Facebook or Twitter or whatever other type of social media they're involved with. It tells us when the date is current of this data that's in the performance measures is current as of November 18th, 2014. We can look at the fiscal year data. We can change the year to look at 15 or 13 or 12, and it shows us how this agency is doing on their key performance indicators. You will notice that there's a lot of redundancy in text. That's because this is a fully 503 compliant website, and it can be machine read by a computer. 501, 508, everyone's throwing me different numbers. It's legal. I mean, blind people can use the site. That's more the important thing. We can also look at the approved budget. We've got budget details. We can look at it compared to other departments, which is really neat to see how the budget is separated out, then how they divide their budget up. And we look at the budget over time. We can download any of these data sets. These little symbols here allow us to take the data that we're looking at here and download right to an Excel spreadsheet. Another sense around open data. It's just pulling from the site that we looked at earlier. We got our vacancies. We've got a whole bunch of stuff on spending in greater detail. And then we have our purchase card. And so all this content's been displayed. It's interactive, and you can change which agency you're looking at any time by just changing which agency you want. So that's an example of using that content that's available on the open data site to build a more sophisticated dashboard application that consumes that. And we could pick a different agency and look at zoning, for example, and look at their key performance indicators and what they've achieved, and et cetera. So with that, I think that's primarily the overview presentation of the pieces that made up the puzzle. Chris?
First slide.
You have a question?
Yep.
I did have one quick question about I did have a question about the underlying data. Is there a sort of a data standard that exists across the agencies in terms of how they report certain things? Because if I'm looking at the GeoJSON data, it would be cool to mix and match between different agencies. Is there a way to do that, or is it sort of depends on the agency and depends on the particular data set that exists?
Yeah, so the DCGIS program has been around for quite a long time. It was first formed by Merrill's order in 2002 and expanded in 2009. And through its life cycle, we have developed many standards around data standards, attribution standards, some GIS-specific type standards that need to be done, metadata standards. And so our data adheres to those standards. Now we are taking a new look at those standards. We're going to revise those standards and come up with standards that make sense for a much larger, broader open data community. And we are currently in the process of reviewing those standards and publishing those. For now, we have the GIS standards and the citywide data standards that have existed. And so we're utilizing those, and then into the future, come up with a new set of standards. There's a lot of concern by me in the industry on personally identifiable information, HIPAA-related information, law enforcement-sensitive information, and data sets that may not contain those inherently, but when matrixed, causes us to have a separate lens on the data. So we need to think about how we want to do that and the standards around that as well. So there's lots of moving parts, and we are working towards a resolution to that. And your group is to help us advise on that we're making sure we're doing that right.
Thank you, Tim, very much. One of the things I said to the council when we presented this to them a few weeks ago is, if I can promise you anything, it's that that you would be able to find things on track.dc or data.dc.gov that are not accurate. And we know that, right? I mean, whenever you put this amount of data, something is not updated, or there's going to be a mistake here and there. We know that. And we took some advice. We talked to folks at the Bloomberg administration who really led their open data initiative, and they said, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good here. Put it out there. Don't be afraid to put it out there. People will surface issues for you. We hope that people will, be appropriately thoughtful when expressing concerns about data. But if it's not here, it's not because we don't want it to be here. It's just because it's not, for whatever reason, the mistake was made. So we hope that the public will help us identify places that it may not, that it may need to be updated. I also want to share that one of the really exciting things we did when this went live, I shared this with some folks in the emerging DC tech sector, which most folks are familiar with. But one of the things we're really excited by putting this out there is we are hoping that the tech sector in DC will seize on some of this data and develop interesting apps that we can only dream of, or maybe we can't even dream of because only they can dream of them. So we're really excited to see what becomes of this. But it's exciting that it's here, but I think what's probably more exciting is the applications that can be developed now that it's out there and accessible. And then sort of finally, we'll close with the sort of final piece of the puzzle is you all. And again, thank you for doing what you're doing. Here's your list. I think David's saying I want to apologize. I think we have the wrong person from OCFO up there. But we are really excited and appreciative now that you're up and running. And we've surfaced some of the issues we want to ask you to grapple with. I mentioned what the right template is for the Open Government Report. What's the right information that people need? Tim referenced the Creative Commons license on the terms and conditions on the website. That's something that we really struggled with internally before we launched this. And I think we got to as good a place as we could get at that moment, but we understood that we wanted to challenge this group, and glad that Ariel is on here representing OAG, because I think OAG has an important voice here. But I also think that OAG needs to hear from other folks. So we hope that there will be a robust conversation about what's the right balance in terms of sharing the intellectual property that we have as the district, but also protecting the district from liability or any other issues that are out there. We don't want to ignore those real concerns. So, we hope that that's, just one example of the kinds of issues that you'll help, frankly, sort of push us forward on, even while being respectful of legitimate concerns. So I appreciate your willingness to do that. And unless there are any other questions, I'm happy to turn it back over to your chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. It's Chris Murphy and Tim Abdella. Okay, without further ado, we'll get back to our task at hand, which is to look at some of the topics that we may be able to address in the short term or medium term.
So, Brian, can we, just for the sake of efficiency, just as we're going through each one of these, if there's an immediately identifiable action item, I can take note of that, and we can just move on down the list?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think are we on number 3? We're in open data now. I think that's where we left off, actually. Criteria for identification and updating of additional data sets. And I think we concluded that was it's not a short-term project. Any comments on this in terms of how to best implement it? Who should be the lead on this? I mean, I certainly have the CA and OCTO. That's who identified data sets most recently, and they work with the agencies closely. There's certainly a role for this group and for the public to play in letting us know what data sets you want to see released and what you want made public.
I agree with you, Mr. Flowers. We definitely plan on spending a lot of time with the public. It only has value if the public consumes it and wants it, and we're going to spend a lot of our time finding out what the public wants to learn from this government. We're not going to just run and publish it either, but we need to know what the public wants from us, because we don't always know what the public wants from within government unless we ask. So we're going to get a lot of input on the public side there. So although it looks like the CA's office in Octo are the lead there, we're going to have a very strong partner with the public and, of course, this body.
Okay.
Does that include like some civic engagement tools, public engagement tools? And
Absolutely.
have you identified those tools yet?
Not necessarily the tools. We're going to do a lot of in-person meetings and figure out the best way for those folks to communicate with us when they're not in front of us. And that's something we're going to ask their help with. How do they want to interact with Octo on these on a regular basis? We'll have in-person meetings, but we'll have opportunities for them to tell us what works for them.
Number 4, types, open data again, types of formats to be used. This is something that's probably going to change over time. But that's one thing I think that was helpful with the presentation that you just saw. So you see what types of format the data is available in now. And the question is, do we need to do more?
The original format in which it was created often. So rather than putting it into PDF, if it's made in Word, put it in Word. If it's made in Excel, put it out in Excel. If it's done in some other document, put it out there. I mean, I think some of the data formats are interchangeable. That's one of the advantages of the web. You can use JSON, you can use YAML, you can use CSV, you can use whatever you want, but ultimately it has to be in the born digital format at the outset.
So again, in terms of our time horizon, probably not something that short term, so putting that off. Number 5, open data, identification of categories of protected data. This is something I think that's clearly ongoing.
Let me speak to that. Well, that's something that we have an obligation to look at. It's certainly something that we have been looking at, and we need to keep looking at it. And it connects to a larger point that probably ought to mention earlier, which is, we have a real opportunity here, not just now, but going into the new year with a group of leaders that is committed to this. This administration has done extraordinary things, and we saw some of the evidence of that just a few minutes ago. We have a mayor-elect who has been very public about her support of these principles, including working with Bob's groups over time. And we have an attorney general-elect, and we consulted just the other day on this, and he's made clear publicly he's deeply committed to promoting open and transparent government throughout the district. And to the point about Category 5, consistent with our obligations as the district lawyers to absolutely look for ways to further promote principles of transparency and to working with each of the stakeholders here. What does that mean as a practical matter? Absolutely. We'll identify the district's IP rights, and we need to ensure those are protected, or to the extent the district decides to make the choice, as we have already in the 1.0 agreement, to waive those rights, that we do it knowledgeably, that we do it with a full understanding of what we're keeping and what we're not. And so one of the challenges will be in the future data sets to identify the resources to figure out what's in there, and do the district or third parties own rights in those data sets or in the information that we need to consider before there's a waiver. All of that has a legal side. It also has a difficult and important resources side for some combing through of voluminous data. And so we're absolutely happy to support that. It's going to take a lot of teamwork in it, and particularly when it comes to combing through data sets, that's something that with Octo and with a number of our colleagues here, we're going to have to work together on.
Bob?
I think we have a definitional issue here, because I'm not sure. I think Ariel has one concept of protected data. My sense from other discussions is that term may apply to exempt data, and I want to make sure which we're talking about.
I agree entirely with Bob's point. Let me speak to it. There are two categories here. One is privacy data, for example. So there was a reference, protected data. There's a reference earlier to HIPAA and the privacy laws, and that's something that we have to observe. And when it comes to open government rules and FOIA appropriately, that stuff stays confidential. Then there's a separate group of data. The district, like state governments throughout the country, has intellectual property rights and has copyright. And the district owns over 200 different copyright licenses recognized by the federal government. I think one of our tasks as an advisory group will be to understand what the district has and whether it's in the public interest for the district to retain those rights, or have a debate about whether and how to waive the district's ownership of those valuable rights. And all that is, I think, is something that is on the table for both of them.
Right, but then in line with the exempt data issue, really, I think those decisions should lie in the OG, not necessarily in the AG's office, to deal with what kinds of information are exempt. Is the information in this data set exempt? Or is a field in this data set exempt? Seems more in line with the role of the OOG in making decisions about disclosure.
Let me, and I think Tracy ought to speak to that too. Let me divide two categories here. A role that will certainly need to play a hand in is identifying under current law what's protected, what's exempt. There's a related question, which is how should those laws change? How should the policies change? And on that, we've had, over the last couple of years, a really productive dialogue with the OG. And that's something that I think this group and the OG's office is more than appropriate places to develop those recommendations. And I suspect that Ms. Hughes has additional comments.
Yeah, I think one important point to remember, particularly now that FOIA Express is in place, we're now taking a look at creating some type of RSS or Twitter feed or something akin to just like an automatic scroll of all of the FOIA requests that have been, the documents that have been produced, which are effectively data. Because they're being published in this public access library, but we've got to make some determinations, and the vendor's going to have to go back to the drawing board on what exactly that means in terms of scrubbing that data of PII. So there's certainly overlap here, but I just wanted to make the group aware that we're thinking ahead in terms of the immediate access of information. And this also speaks to item number 1, the proactive disclosure of documents. So when documents are released pursuant to FOIA, in theory, they go into this public access library. But as a general matter, unless you have submitted that request 9 times out of 10, or if you're a frequent flyer, 9 times out of 10, you're not really in the public access library very much. So as part of this proactive disclosure consideration and expanding proactive disclosure, we're taking a look at with the vendor what is going to be the best means of allowing the public another means of being able to view all those documents that are being pushed out under the FOIA channel.
I guess I'm still, we started out talking about data sets. And data sets may have fields that are exempt, fields that are not exempt. And they should be segregable so that somebody can get access to the disclosable data and not to the exempt data. The question is, and I'm also thinking about the world with the AG after January 1st, which is a different world than it is today. It still seems to me that the role of addressing the issues of whether a portion of a data set is exempt from disclosure, is protected in that sense, is really a job for the OOG, which is supposed to be the entity in the government with the most knowledge of the FOI Act and related statute.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you reference FOIA, because all of this is still under the rubric of FOIA, and the question is whether or not it'll be proactively, the information will be proactively disclosed in whole or in part, and if it's not going to be disclosed in whole, will it be withheld or be released only in response to a FOIA request?
Well, but I don't think a data set may include, there are undoubtedly many data sets that the district has that have some private data that's by statute cannot be disclosed or fits within an exemption in the FOI Act, so it won't be disclosed. The data set can be released as long as the fields that are subject to exemption or are prohibited from disclosure can be locked out of the publicly disclosed information.
Yeah, to me, that also goes to Ariel's point that we would have to look at the data we will be looking at data sets before they're released, and in terms of priorities, I would think you'd release the ones that are free of those sort of impediments before you release the other ones.
And in principle, I actually agree entirely with Bob. Something I don't say every day. I think what, to me, the analog is a reduction in protected someone's date of birth or social security on a document that's otherwise disclosed. And the difficulty will be a practical one, is how to identify and find the resources to achieve that segregation in this publicly shared document.
So this actually dovetails nicely with one of the topics that I hoped, I'm not sure where it fits, frankly, so maybe it fits into the protected disclosure category. But one thing that I think would be helpful to remember and to think about in this context is that data collection, we are data collectors, and we ought to be thinking about how we are thoughtfully collecting our data with an eye toward disclosure or to essentially avoid the need for redaction. It seems to me that we could be, this entity could take as part of its charge the task of saying, well, what are our major data sets that we're called upon to request? Things like travel information, procurement data, personal information, and how can we make sure that when at the point of collection, we're protecting against the need to have to redact later or have to protect against the personal burden of going through these things, and ensuring that our forms are written the right way and collected the right way, so that that proactive disclosure is frankly a trivial next step, as opposed to an intermediate step of having to go through and review it. I think if this entity can persuade the government to think about format and the data collection at the outset, we'll have accomplished a lot of our responsibility.
I think the sooner we can pose these questions to the open government liaisons of the respective agencies, the better. Because right now, just so much of this, we just don't know because we're not at every agency level.
Have anything further on this point? Number 6, open data revisions to terms and conditions applicable to the district data. This is certainly an ongoing issue and discussion, and it's I would probably say actively being reviewed.
And we've already had one reference to suggestions for possible modifications of the terms and conditions, and we certainly welcome that, and also welcome them from folks in the public who may have a particular interest in one part of the terms and conditions, or other members here. We did, to the earlier point, as part of the effort to allow the government to roll out these 200 plus data sets. We do have the initial sets of terms and conditions. I have no doubt that with enough insights and sharp minds, they can be improved, and those comments are timely and welcome.
I'm going to skip over number 7 now, the open government reports, because we've got a separate spot on the agenda for it. We might as well discuss it all at one time at that point. Number 8, webcasting. Recommendation on which boards and commissions to prioritize. Have any thoughts on this? Any comments on this?
I guess my idea would be to prioritize ANCs, which are not covered by the Open Meetings Act, but do have an open meetings provision in their enabling statute, and it seems to be one of the big stumbling blocks to getting ANCs to be transparent.
Okay.
I'd like to have some official input here, since I'm interacting with the majority of the boards and commissions on compliance with the Open Meetings Act, so I have a pretty good sense of which public bodies have the technological ability in place now to web stream, or, with some intermediary fixes, they can get up online pretty easily versus those that don't. I think that also, too, we need to identify a couple of other general locations in the city that can be equipped with web streaming technology for public bodies to use in the absence of them having the availability of that technology, or in absence of them having the budget, having the equipment costs in their budgets, to equip their own facilities with that kind of equipment. So I think that in the short term, or perhaps in the medium term, if the city could identify another 2 locations around the city that, of course, publicly accessible, I think that would go a long way towards ensuring that a greater number of the public meetings will be web streamed.
Rob?
I've just got a quick comment on this one. We've been working on some technology to be able to offer streaming, and I think we did demo some of that to your agency recently as well, Tracy. And I can commit to finding some funds and some locations where we could provide that level of service until such time as we get the FY16 formulation done and maybe turn that into a project where we can expand that. So we can work toward that. It's probably a medium term, short to medium term. Certainly not anything by the end of the calendar year, but shortly after that, we should have a pretty good idea what we can do.
So,
As for the prioritization, I think that's a boards and commissions issue, right? As to which ones to televise or just.
well, I mean, I forget how many there are, several hundred boards and commissions.
176.
No, thank you.
To be precise.
Now, we haven't received input. I haven't received input from the public in terms of which ones they want to see live. I know there are some that already do it. Zoning, I think the ABC board has a capacity. I don't know whether they do it or not. But there are some boards that really affect people's lives more than others. And I think that's one thing I would like for us to really try to come back with in 2 weeks, is a recommendation as to which boards and commissions to prioritize for live streaming. But did I hear you right that location is a real consideration here, and that it's easier to just have dedicated rooms? Sort of, I think as Tracy was saying.
It is. It's always easy when you're trying to deliver a live stream somewhere that you actually have the throughput to do it in a certain level of quality. And so we can't just drop a live stream anywhere unless we really wanted to do it low quality, which may not be very consumable for the general public. So what I'm talking about is really a solution for government, as well as in other cases for boards and commissions and the public to maybe use that service where we could get high quality performance out of it. That does imply certain locations where we know we have connectivity.
So then, can you identify a few locations, let's say by our next meeting, just so that that information would be available?
Yeah, we could provide a large list of locations. The question really becomes which ones are optimal. So getting locations of where we can provide service, that's an easy one.
Okay.
And then, of course, the BIGA hearing room, that's always available because we only use it 1 day a month. So that's another option for use by public bodies. But I think that, Brian, I could probably work with the Office of Boards and Commissions and identify pretty quickly, since I'm already in constant communication with the points of contact, to identify which boards and commissions would be optimal to begin web streaming in the short term.
Okay, so for me, yeah, did you have a comment, Bob? For me, that's something that we can actually do in 2 weeks, to identify which boards to prioritize. So we'll try to have some recommendation at the next meeting on that.
Yes, I can do that.
Yes, Ken.
I just had a question regarding webcasting. Is this something that is being driven by the fact that the technology is available, or is it being driven by the fact that there has been a demand by an audience that will consume these webcasts? If you look at public turnout typically for these boards and meetings, and the amount of viewers that the Office of Cable Television gets when they televise their events, they're generally pretty low. If we had lots of people clamoring, saying that we want to watch this, but we can't go to them, so please bring it into our homes, before we spend a whole lot of money to roll this out for a whole lot of agencies, do we know that this is going to be consumed?
Well, I think that's a really good question. New York passed a webcasting law, and that was an issue that was raised there. And I think the counterpoint that was made was that if the one person who's watching the meeting is a journalist, then that's an opportunity to inform hundreds or thousands of other people. To me, it's driven by just the push to move government online altogether. We moved government services online. We're in the process of moving more government information online, and the next logical step is to move government meetings online. And to me, it's driven by technology and demand. certainly, most people, when I say most, a lot of people will watch something on their phone before they'll show up to a meeting. That's one way to put it.
I guess the one thing that I'm hoping would be in place is some sort of feedback and evaluating mechanism when we go forward with a small amount of these webcasts to see how they're doing, make sure that we're promoting them as well as we can before we commit to pushing hundreds of these things out there for an expense that we may be doing just because we think that we should be doing it or it looks good, as opposed to actually giving a service that people are using.
So I think the encouraging news, Rob, and this is after I saw the demo of Ustream yesterday with a member of your staff, that part of the packaging for this service, you can do surveys of people who are actually tapping in or watching your systems on live stream. So immediate, I don't know how it works, but I'm assuming immediately thereafter, maybe during, they can take an immediate survey gauging their interest in the technology. Was it good or bad? Would you like to see more of it? So I asked Maram if he could just take a look at that offering and find out if that would be an option for us as we're looking at rolling out more capability for web streaming.
That's why one of the reasons I suggested ANCs was they are probably the closest point of contact for most residents of the city with their government. There are some ANCs that have started doing this on their own in Ward 3 and I believe Ward 6 and maybe other places in the city with positive results. So that's...
Yeah, I'm sorry David Singh had to leave early because we could ask him about the fiscal impact. But I will have him weigh in on that.
I'm still stunned by the number of people who claim to watch Channel 13. So one thing that I would note, and this may dovetail into Part 11, is that if we are going to be entering into contracts with vendors for streaming, one thing that I think we ought to be thoughtful of, and this group in particular should be thoughtful of, is the idea of making sure that we still have ownership of that data. I've experienced with a number of vendors in the past when they provide services like this, where they provide streaming and whatever, you actually don't have the underlying data. You don't manage that yourself. You were dependent on that vendor to do it. So it may be worth emphasizing that if we are going to be using vendors to provide these types of public services, which we're likely to do, and there are many good reasons to do that, we at the same time ensure that we have the ability to at any time say, this is ours. We can stop the relationship with the vendor and have that data be our own.
Let me make sure that I heard you right. You want to make sure that the district retains ownership rights to its data for something that's streamed.
Control of that data so that it's available to us even after the contract ends.
Yeah,
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, Dave, that streaming data would actually go through our video teleconferencing infrastructure, and it would only be a duplicate publication. We would have a copy of all that.
Perfect. I just, from personal experience, and it actually related to streaming data, that we had this situation where we didn't have it. And I've heard from other legislatures and other jurisdictions where they go to streaming and it's the right idea, but then they decide that their vendor is, not good or they're not providing services, and then they find that, oh, we have this whole back catalog of videos that we can't publish.
If that's the only record of the meeting, we'd really have a problem there.
Agreed.
And then two, and Rob, I don't know if you all have addressed this for webcasting, and whatever the capacity will be for archiving those videos, or unless we want to just go ahead and recommend to the boards and commissions that participate in live web streaming that they create their own YouTube channels, just as an intermediary step to make sure that the video actually lives someplace else.
I think for those streaming events that actually go through our infrastructure, we're okay there. But someone using an external channel, we do have a contractual hurdle to climb there.
I think we've addressed number 9, recommendations on best practices, technology and methods to be used. And I think we probably agree that it's not a short-term project, even though Rob is going to weigh in on that to some extent. Or, I mean, let me open that up. Or is that something we can come back with a recommendation on in 2 weeks?
I think given the workload that we've got at the moment, committing to 2 weeks, probably a little bit aggressive. I was
Okay.
really looking at something like January.
Yeah.
And I can at least identify the top list of 5. I think that's a good number to start out with. Boards and commissions that I think would be good to do a test run of this. But I can do that in 2 weeks.
Okay.
I think unless we're committed to having turkey together, probably keeping this as a medium-term goal is a good idea.
You heard Tom. You heard Tim Abdallah talk about eating our own dog food. I think that may not be what we're trying to do.
Number 11. Providing recommendations on policies, terms and conditions, requirements, and procedures that promote open government data through procurement of goods and services. Was this one of your recommendations, Dave? Speak to it.
Sure. So actually, that's the web streaming was one of these examples. I've discovered that a lot of contracting vehicles are made with an eye toward immediate use, delivering the service directly for the agency at that particular time, without a lot of consideration about how the data is going to be collected, how it's going to be maintained, how it's going to be provided to the district government, how it's going to be published. We've had source code issues in the past where we get a piece of software that's built for the District of Columbia, but it's maintained in a proprietary system somewhere else in another server that we don't have access to. And it seems that these are the types of things that if we're being thoughtful about having open data as part of our sort of a open data first process, our procurement vehicles need to be built with an eye toward that, because they still provide $1 billion of, I don't know if that number is still good or if it's close, but ballpark of $1 billion in goods and services that we buy every year. And to the extent that we can leverage that vehicle to promote open data, it seems like that's a good opportunity.
And then also whatever vendors we're contracting with to assist us in this regard, that it speaks to our existing platforms. Because many of the agencies are continuing to operate in silos. So I think we've got a good opportunity here to take a hard look at that. And even if they're enterprise systems, just make sure that they speak to all the things that they need to.
Yeah, I mean, interoperability is important. I think that one of the conversations that is really important about data standards and making sure that you have a data standard that applies across agencies, so that will reduce the procurement costs. It'll ensure that agencies might be able to rely on systems that other agencies are using. I imagine that there are a lot of independent agencies that have their own set of needs, where if they knew that another independent agency or subordinate agency was using that, solving that problem already, that they wouldn't have to go out and procure it. So I think there are ways that procurement can actually be a catalyst for open data, but also will make just government more efficient if we think about open data as part of our procurement process.
Okay, I'm not seeing this as a short term.
Well, I don't think it's a short term. I think it's, but I do think that we could start. I don't want to say with low hanging fruit. I hate that phrase, but I think we could start with some sort of preliminary ideas of what procurement vehicles make sense to identify. I think that just identifying the type of procurement that would be amenable to open data would be helpful, sort of as a short-term project.
It all makes a great deal of sense to me, and one thing that occurs to me is that since if we're going to have kind of a heavy procurement discussion, probably having somebody from OCP, at least for purposes of Category 11, would save us time and energy and give us insight into the various moving parts. And as folks may know, they've been going through a great deal of reform and restructuring, and so this may allow us to catch them as they are rolling out some new systems.
Well, we can certainly approach them and have someone come to the meeting and speak to that. I mean, if that's the pleasure of the group. Before we move on, anything more on that, number 11? Does anybody have any other comment on any of the items on this list before we move forward? And by moving forward, I mean I want to just take in anything else someone wants to add to the list and then we'll go to the open government report. So anything currently on the list that someone wants to speak to? Okay, new items. Anybody have any new items they want to add to this list?
As I said earlier, I think that we need to have a legislative component to this list.
Okay.
We have a web of statutes that have open records and open meetings provisions in them that should be cleaned up so that the FOI Act and the Open Meetings Act become the real statutes that are used in these situations, in all across agencies. For example, the AVRA has its own open meetings provisions. ANCs have their own open meetings provisions. We would like, as the Open Government Coalition, would like to see them covered by the Open Meetings Act and their individual open meetings provisions removed. But those are not the only ones in the code. So one of the things that needs to happen, whether this is done by the AG's office or the Open Government Office or through work of this group, is to figure out where those things are and start making recommendations for cleaning things up. An example of why this is important is there are two bills currently pending. They were introduced by Council Members Che and Grasso. One, that got public hearings a month ago. One would have amended the ANC statute to require them to publish certain things on their websites affirmatively and publish them through the office of ANCs. And there's another one that went to boards and commissions and their calendars and biographies of members and things like that. They were aimed at amending the enabling statutes, which, when in fact most of the information they sought to get into the public is already covered by provisions in the FOI Act. So in order to eliminate some of this confusion and also to concentrate for a lot of purposes, litigation purposes or interpretation purposes, all of transparency legislation in one place, this is an important project.
So I think I hear you say you want to eliminate redundant and conflicting provisions from enabling statutes that conflict with.
That would be a very good start.
So we have to identify them.
Legislative issue.
Okay, yeah.
The other legislative issue is, do we need to amend the FOI Act and the Open Meetings Act to reflect that, based on experience, to make them function better?
And I think we also need to take a look at drafting legislation that legislates a good portion of this Open Government Transparency Directive to ensure that the supplying of data outlives or, any mayoral administration. But I think that's all part of the legislative package to be considered. And one other thing that we haven't really discussed, but I think that we should at least keep it in mind and on all of these fronts, particularly as it pertains to FOIA and open data, is a discussion around, or whatever the process is going to be for archiving that data and then also existing records as we move towards digitizing more of our records. So that's not on this list, but that's definitely a long-term goal. But it should definitely add it as part of what we should be reviewing.
Anybody have any other suggestions?
One of the things I think may be included in one of the other provisions, and maybe Nancy can tell me, is developing new records management systems. So that developing them so that they maximize transparency and minimize the effort it takes to make the data that they're collecting transparent. And I'm not sure I see that in any of these categories.
That's a great point, and our records management is an issue that that many governments, many administrations have had to face and try to resolve. There's no easy, quick, simple answer to that, but I think you're right on the points there. They've got a lot of merit, and when we move to actually solve our data management and retention and records management solutions and business problems, I agree. We have to keep that in mind. I think that's probably a year or two away before we probably settle on how we're going to handle records management. We do have some technology there. That doesn't mean that it works for everybody, right?
I'm just saying it should be on this list.
Let me recognize Aisha. Did you have a?
So we've talked about, webcasting for boards and commissions, but I think that on the agency level, there's also meetings and public meetings that occur. And so I think that addressing how agencies deal with their own meetings, I know that it's something that for my agency in particular, we have a transcriber that comes to our surplus meetings and actually takes down what everybody is saying so that it's open and transparent, and we post those transcriptions of our meetings on our website. So it just makes it easier for people to see exactly what happened, short of having an actual webcast for it. It's an alternative for agencies that maybe can't make it to the locations, or they can't because the requirements in the law don't allow for that.
Okay.
One thing that I think maybe, and not to pick up on the records management, and I don't know what the answer is here, is the vision for this entity that we're at right now that we are going to make advice for, we come back with our 6-month report and we say our work here is done, or is the idea that we're going to be sort of engaged in an ongoing process by which we're evaluating and proposing existing proposals? So something like records management makes a great deal of sense that's something, if we're going to do a report, we should just say right now, someone's got to get serious about it, right? Like that's the report. It can't be that we're going to say much more than that. But I think, part of the problem that we've had, I don't mean recently, I think this is just government problems, is that they haven't had consistent bodies that are going through on a regular basis, revising, revisiting, going back and trying to iterate through it. So in some respects, this entity might be a natural home for conversations about records management. On the other hand, there are other entities at play, the Secretary's office and others, who aren't at this table. So it's not clear to me where we fit, and that's sort of an existential question, which I know is given, as you said at the outset, it's still uncertain, but it may inform some of these discussions, because I think this entity could play an important role there. But if it is sort of a advise and get out, then it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Well, my view is that it would be ongoing until it's no longer needed.
Then I agree with Bob that records management should be part of it.
But, this is the organizational meeting, the opening session, so we're really sort of brainstorming, trying to come up with agenda items that will be addressed in the future. And, the more, it's fine to add as many items as we can think of, and then they would be winnowed as we go forward in the process of prioritizing. Any other recommendations or suggestions? Okay, we're going to discuss these agency open government reports. Let me say, after this, we'll hear from anyone in the public who wants to speak, and we'd be happy if you have suggestions as to items to add to this list of things to be considered by the committee. Yes. Sure. So stand in recess for 5 minutes. All right. Okay, I'm calling the meeting back to order. Moving to item 6 on the agenda. A review of open government reports, and it is also item number 7 on the list of topics for the committee to consider. Our charge includes reviewing and evaluating agency open government reports for the purpose of providing recommendations on improving the content and format of the reports. We have 65 reports. I believe this is one of the responsibilities we'll be able to address in the short term. I did last night completed my review of the other reports. I must say the review was more thorough for the first 20 than for the last 45. but it's an ongoing project. I guess the first question to pose is, are these reports valuable, useful, and then if so, how can they be improved? How do you want to approach evaluating them? I mean, certainly we could put up a matrix and a scorecard, with the agency, and then we'd have different categories and just give each agency a grade. That'd be one way to do it, but then is there value in doing that? Anybody have any suggestions on how we go about this?
What was the charge from the mayor in terms of doing this?
Let's see.
In the directive, it's under,
Appears in two places. In the mayor's order, it's number 3, section 3, F. Review and evaluate agency open government reports and provide recommendations on improving the content and format of the reports. And then it appears again in I, which we addressed in the bylaws. It says the chairperson of the group shall publish the evaluation and recommendations on the open government. That's not. Well, that would include that. But essentially, it is to review and evaluate the reports and make any recommendations for improving the content or format of the reports.
I think that one thing that would make it easier to evaluate the reports and the agency's performance is to key the report on what they put online to 2-536. So we know that they're satisfying each of the, whatever it is, 10 or 12 categories, and would be helpful to have the links to the information on their website.
Well, each website now does have a list that corresponds to each of the categories in 2-536.
But I've looked at a few of them and really had a hard time finding some of the information. It would be good, if, as I said, to evaluate their compliance. It would seem that a good way to organize it would be to say, okay, we're complying with this, and this, but we're not complying with that. Because that forces them to come back and raise the question for themselves. Are we meeting our requirements?
Yeah, no.
It gives us a way of pointing to what we're evaluating, seeing what we're evaluating.
Because the reports were to be prepared in conformance with the mayor's order, which lists 15 categories of information, which is more than required by 2-536. However, as Chris Murphy explained during the presentation, these reports are truncated because the agencies were given approximately a month to prepare the reports.
I understand that this is, that they were under pressure
Yeah.
to do this, but I'm talking about in the future. It would be
Sure.
helpful to have them organized so that we can actually get to, the information that they're talking about.
So Brian, maybe.
Keith and then Dave.
I was just thinking, because I actually did one of these reports for one of the public safety agencies, and what he's saying makes a lot of sense. When we look at them as a whole, it's kind of mind-numbing. You're looking at 65 agencies' reports that essentially, because of the time that we had to do it in the format that we did it under, you're kind of seeing a lot of the same thing over and over and over. Most people aren't going to consume them that way. They're looking at one particular agency or a handful. And so it's not so much the same thing over and over, but when they see that, we told them in a particular section, we put this online, we link to this, but the links, I think, would help tremendously for the people that were there. We talk about having open public meetings at a certain agency and that minutes are posted. It would be great for simply in the report for all these hot links to be inserted in the report. It will take longer for the people doing the report, but in the future, whoever's doing these reports is going to have a lot more time than we did when we did them the first time. And I think that would make them a much more useful tool to the people, rather than just something we're doing to comply with the open government.
And when David and then Rachel.
I was just going to say, might it be easier to put all of this into some sort of spreadsheet that or a database that has it, that you could search at a quick base or something like that?
In
rather
terms of-
than the template. I mean, having filled out the template, there was a lot of things for the deputy mayor's offices that were not applicable at all. And so
Right.
the template looks fairly empty for our office when in fact, you know, everything that we are in compliance with everything that we need to be in compliance with.
But when you say a spreadsheet, you mean a spreadsheet for the agencies to use in completing the report or for us to evaluate the reports?
Well, it's probably both. Having the agencies complete the their line of the spreadsheet that then is all put into one place, which allows us to more easily evaluate rather than going through each individual templated report.
So in line with that, maybe one way that we can start this process, and you know what we should do is we should tell all the agencies, we get it, you had 1 month to do it, but this is how we're going to evaluate it for now. And so when we come back to this next year, we'll do the same process. Is to actually just use the bullet points, right? So we have 3 and 1, I guess 8 and 2, and just assign them 1 to 3, whether they're in compliance would be a 2, not in compliance with a 1, and exceptional is a 3. And so that way, we can do a binary, but whatever, we just have some sort of a way that we can go through each of the bullet points and see if they've addressed all of the topics. And then if we want sort of a narrative description on the back end, we can do it, but that gives us a quick way to do sort of a dashboard style evaluation.
You mean the bullet points in the guidance as opposed to the order?
Well,
What they actually used?
Well, the mayor's order actually says it shall address the following topics. And then
Yeah.
we can look, and some of them are evaluative, so meets its legal obligation, information dissemination obligations under FOIA and Open Meetings Act. All of them are going to say yes, but maybe one way that we can do it is we can actually see what Bob is saying. Do they have all of this stuff on their website? Online access to proposed rules and regulations, if they have such things on their report, then they can be a 2. Just so that we can comply with our obligation to an evaluative function, and at the same time make it a little bit less painful for us when we're trying to cull through all of these reports, that we can have some sort of a systematic way of saying, yep, they complied, no, they didn't comply. It's not the best way of doing it, but at least it's a way that we can start with now. And I can start the spreadsheet.
I also think that one of the quickest way to get results is to hand out grades or scores. If you've ever seen a deputy mayor come back from the mayor's office or an agency head come back from the deputy mayor's office with a sheet of paper on it that shows that their agency is not the top of something, you see results happen real fast. So if we can find a way to qualitatively go through this, it will be useful, and I think it would affect quick change.
It would just,
Kathy?
I'm sorry, they would just be seem
Then Tracy.
tricky to, like, what's a transparency, specifically, obligations of one agency versus another might be different. So or how much data do they have? Is it a lot or is it a little? How much to give out? I don't know. I would feel tricky about, you could say if they mentioned it, I guess, but
I guess that's why I'm trying
I don't know
to,
what the denominator is about, like, what's the expectation?
yeah, and that's why I think we shouldn't necessarily do, A through F, but just basically say compliance or non-compliance.
I also think, to the extent that some of this can be standardized, like if they have a Twitter or a Facebook page, then that could be entered someplace and that could just be there. They don't need to report it again and again. Or the FOIA Express, can that generate the reports of how many FOIA places they answered? And there's an automatic FOIA report that just gets in here without the agencies having to do that. So I think looking at ways that there could be some standardized pieces of this might both help us look across the agencies and relieve the burden from the staff filling this stuff out.
Tracy?
Can any of this be built into Track DC? I mean, the metrics are already there. I mean, the tool's already there to do this, right? So can we do something similar for open government efforts, agency efforts?
I mean, it certainly could be, but again, we're looking at the different sets of criteria. We're looking at what the order contemplates, which is the full set of requirements versus the rather modest set of requirements that agencies were able to produce in 3 or 4 weeks.
As an example, the Open Government Coalition about 2010 got students at the Graduate Journalism Program at AU to go through websites of about 60 agencies. And we put that information up on our site. It is there. You can look at it as an agency by agency thing, or you can look at it as the issue of which agencies have their personnel policies up and get a list of all the agencies for that section of the statute. And that seems like a logical way for dealing with this report. I certainly would get it put up on our website if the data were available in that format. So because that's way out, at this point it's way out of date, especially in light of all the websites that have been rebuilt in the past year or two. So the links don't work. But the point is, that's valuable information for people who are trying to get government information. And not only does it tell us whether agencies are complying, but it also provides a roadmap for getting information from the government.
Justin? I mean, I would say, I hear three things. One being the assessment of the open government reports as is. And then I could see us providing, and that would be just what's been proposed so far, is just a report card or a score sheet or something like that. And I think the other thing is maybe a meta-narrative addressing all agencies at large, summarizing in more detail recommendations for improving the reports for the next time. I think that's a good idea. I think a third piece is something we've touched on already, is basically recommendations for how we should structure the open government reports for the next time. I'm assuming in October as well. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. Now, the only issue I'm having besides the two different types of standards is the issue of how you actually compare some of these agencies. Like you compare MPD with Office of Religious Affairs, and I think that's what you were touching on, Kathy, is that it's almost apples and oranges. But, I mean, we've got to start somewhere. So.
Right. Brian, I don't know if you're necessarily comparing one agency to the other. You have a regulatory agency that has to put up its regulatory opinions according to statute. There are other agencies that have no regulatory or adjudicative authority. That provision doesn't apply to them. Right. The question is, do they have the information on their website? Yes, no, or is it too hard to find? And yes, but it's too hard to find. Maybe.
I also think that, Chris had it right, that we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Mm-hmm. We know that MPD is different from the Office of Religious Affairs, but they still have an open data report. The mayor has helpfully given them and us guidance about what things need to be included in the report, and we should just go through that effort of seeing whether they measure up to the what's in the mayor's order, and to the extent that we need to refine the reporting requirements so that it's easier next year, we should do that as well. But, I think the sooner we get started, the better.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Justin?
Just to go back to this, we're not comparing agencies to each other. We're comparing agencies to how well they performed in answering the open government report. So if the response is, we've reviewed our policies and our administrative documents and we found them to be incompliant and we have nothing to provide, then that is a successful response to answering the question. So they would be incompliant.
Tracy?
I also think it'd be helpful to group the agencies in some kind of logical manner. I don't know what that is. I don't know if we want to go ahead just for consistency's sake, group the agencies just as they are. Is it on Track DC or is it, on Track DC? Or if we want to group them in some similar fashion or not, but I think we should consider that just for the sake of ease of review by the public.
Mm-hmm. And for us, it might be easier to figure out what the standards are for this group.
Okay. So then we're talking in terms of constructing a spreadsheet essentially that would have list the agency and list the categories that they were required to complete. Rachel?
I think that Chris may already have some of that created because I know that they were tracking to see who had complied. So we may have something, at least a template already created or something to start from. Because I know I saw a spreadsheet that had green for complied, yellow for almost there, and red for not in compliance that we then had to take back to our cluster and get everybody to comply.
Yeah, I think that was tied to that. Well, no, it would be pretty close. I think you're right about that. Yeah,
So we may not have to recreate.
yeah, I think you're right
what we-
about that.
This
Yes,
is
sir.
this is just a clarifying question. How many agencies were subject to this?
Well, we had 65 reports. I know Octo changed the websites of 80 agencies. So I'd say at least 80. You think there were more than that, Tracy?
I think there are a little bit more. I think there are a little bit more because the request went out to both subordinate and independent agencies. Of course, the independent agencies were not obligated to comply. The majority of them have. But we're missing like a really big one. Are we still missing the CFO?
We might be.
Okay.
I don't have
So-
to, I'd have to look and make sure.
So, but there are going to be gaps is my point. Yeah.
I mean, I think this would be it would behoove us to have a list of all agencies, all subordinate agencies, independent agencies, anybody that was subject to this. I also am looking at the mayor's order, and if I'm reading this correctly, I mean, it was basically required of all public bodies, boards and commissions as well. I didn't see any boards and
Yeah,
commissions.
I can tell you that the order's written in a couple of, it's a little quirky because the mayor's authority over all agencies resides in FOIA. So the provisions in 2-536 can be imposed upon independent agencies. The other requirements could not be affirmatively imposed, but most agencies did comply, most independent agencies. Certainly WASA, UDC, State Board. Yeah, zoning. I think there was pretty good compliance, but that would be another issue just to go through and determine that, so.
I think you have a problem with definition. I think the FOI Act, the definition of a public body covers boards and commissions as well as agencies. The problem is that the Open Meetings Act uses public bodies differently than the FOI Act. And so that's a completely different issue, but it does cause confusion.
But I think this goes back to your earlier point about harmonization of legislative policies relating to open government.
And, you know, to that point, one related topic to put into the policy discussion bucket is if the consensus is there's value, you know, to having this report from every single public body, be it independent, subordinate, non-subordinate, et cetera. While it's true that the mayor's authority only extends to the subordinate agencies, the council's authority goes to all those bodies. And so that's something that we could explore as a recommendation about systematizing the transparency reporting requirements.
I should note at this point, I will diligently recuse myself from all conversations about council legislation.
Well, so then now we're at the question of assignments and how to divide up going through these reports. Tracy has the obligation to go through each one of them. I mean, as do we all. But I think in terms of being able to focus and drill down on some of these, it might be helpful if we have a division. See if we have, now Tracy, you've done these by cluster.
Right.
And we certainly have
So
done them
they're
in alphabetical
PDF
order.
on the biga-dc.gov website. If you go to the Office of Open Government, you just slide down to the Open Government Reports tab. They're organized by cluster, and as I mentioned earlier, they're just combined PDF files, but they're separated. So I don't know if we want to just assign people by 2s or 3s per category. And a couple of those, like the Office of the Inspector General and the Office of the Attorney General, are standalones simply because of where they reside on the city's organizational chart. That's the only rationale. But the reports are combined by cluster in accordance to the org chart.
One of those PDFs had 128 pages, and most of the other ones were much shorter.
It's the Executive Office of the Mayor and probably the City
maybe that
Administrator.
needs to be defined.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Is what I was saying.
Yeah, yeah.
And we have some individuals here who actually represent the offices of deputy mayors who have agencies underneath them. it's certainly logical for them, and I can't imagine they would not anyway examine the agencies that are in their cluster.
I should note that on the GitHub site, there is actually a data file that lists all of the agency reports, and basically that maybe they're all broken up and they have direct links. And so that's actually what we use to generate the list on the website. So I mean there are I think 50 reports that are on there right now. So.
I mean, just a real quick question. Is this something that we're going to divide up among all 15 members, or is this something that we're going to break off into like a committee structure to address?
Well, I mean, that's the question. I think all members here need to actually look at some of these reports. Yeah. Now, we have reproduced, I think we've got about 5 or 10 hard copies of the reports in alphabetical order. They're there, and we've got a couple more. Yeah.
The possibility is for somebody to go through the entire list and just divide it up into approximately equal sections.
Yeah.
So 5 or 6 sections, and then assign 3 people in the group to go through each section. That's the quick and dirty way to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I can do that and just send out an email so that you can come back with it. And what I would do is also include the spreadsheet at the same time. Yeah, so then when we convene again on December 3rd, that work will have been completed and we can go around and make reports.
Can I just add something? I guess you could looking at agencies within your own cluster one of 2 ways. A, you would be most familiar with them and you would be looking at them anyway, or B, you might not be the most objective reader of whether or not I think MPD or FEMS is in compliance. So
yeah,
I mean, either way is fine by me. If you want to put me on public safety, that works for me. If you want to have me not look at anything but public safety, that works for me.
Well, I'm glad you raised that point because it's a good reason not to assign that to you, since you're going to read it anyway, and you're not necessarily going to be objective. So yeah, that's a good point. So that they'll be assigned in that way. So you won't be assigned any agencies that are in your cluster. So we're also going to need a narrative for improving the reports, and then how to structure the next reports. I agree with your analysis there, Justin. Anything further on agency open government reports? Try to have something out to you by Friday. Anything further before I invite the public to come and comment?
Brian, I think we need to have someplace forum to have discussions between meetings. Whether that's a listserv or some other email system or some way that we can all communicate with each other. I understand that at some point somebody might file a FOIA request. I don't think that's a problem. But I think we need to have a way to have discussions on this.
Do you want to have your laptop that you're using to post to this forum taken and looked at on the hard drive for the contents when somebody FOIAs? That's just something to keep in mind, because we're going to be using government laptops. None of us does anything but government work on them.
Okay, I can designate an account that I will use all the time, and if somebody wants to come and look at my account, that account, that's fine. But the point is, we need to be able to communicate with each other as a group, and not go through. I mean, up until now, you BCC'd everybody, and I understand why you did that, but it sort of inhibits work.
I don't know what if we have something that exists, but do we have like a web portal thing where we could just actually post directly to the portal? I mean, if we're talking about transparency by default, why not just have our portal be a public portal? We all know it going
whatever
in.
it is, it's got to be completely public and transparent.
Yeah, so why don't we just have a portal that goes, when Bob wants to write all of us, Bob writes to all of us. When we write back to Bob, Bob right?
All of us and the public.
All of us in the public, so that way it's a public forum that we can discuss on. Not necessarily that the public can come back to us, because then there's CAPTCHA issues and spam issues and whatever, but at least that we have a public forum that we can post to and talk to each other on in a public way.
Is there a way to get a notification when things are posted on that? Because adding one more thing that we're gonna have to look at is just
I mean,
From Rob, then Ariel.
I'll be happy to go back and look
Tracy.
at a few options and figure out the best way to get that done. And let me refer that to some of my technical folks and see if they have some ideas.
I mean, we could do it on GitHub, but I think that
Ariel?
there's a learning curve there.
I find Bob's request entirely reasonable. I wonder if there's a low-tech way, if the three public members of our committee are comfortable with emails, which everyone should appropriately understand are not privileged and confidential, and they want to send emails. I mean, maybe individuals can say that if they want their email covered. I'm certainly happy to share my email with Bob. Bob and I have emailed for 3.5 years about this stuff, all of which is open to FOIA, not particularly interesting, but that might be a low-tech and low-tech approach that's consistent with the spirit of the advisory committee.
I must express I'm not really comfortable with that approach, because I mean it's totally contrary to me to the concept of an open meeting and an open body. Tracy, you have any thoughts?
I think that whatever we discuss should be within the context of it being visible to everyone. But my only concern is because I know that the city has some reticence about using Google Docs and other things, but I'd like to find out if there's a happy medium between Google Docs and SharePoint so that we can all access it on a relatively easy basis and regularly.
Again, I don't have any particularly strong feeling about which technological medium we choose, but it does seem to make sense to have some way to communicate, and it does seem to make sense, to Brian's concern, to have those communications, to the extent they're of interest to the public, be accessible to the public, and whether that's, publishing the emails or putting them on putting on an accessible listserv, I leave to the group, but the basic concept seems pretty reasonable.
Even though listservs is kind of like an antiquated way of communicating, it's something that's typical to many agencies, particularly public safety agencies. So MPD, for example, has a very robust listserv broken down by ward. So it wouldn't be atypical or uncommon for the public to become accustomed to seeing something like that. I'm not necessarily advocating that's the best option, but I certainly don't think it would be foreign to any member of the public to see this group communicating in that manner.
And I thought there was a way Google to set it so people can see but not post.
Anything further on this?
I've got one more,
Yes, sir.
which is, this is a transparency body. We should be complying with the Open Meetings Act. In order to do that with regard to minutes, we need to be able to approve minutes outside of a meeting. Is that possible? Is that legally possible?
I've never heard of that.
You can take a look at minutes, but they have to be voted upon in the public portion of the meeting. But meeting minutes, detailed meeting minutes are to be posted in lieu of a video or full transcription. So this meeting has been live streamed. We've already made,
We have a video record, so we don't need to do that.
the video will be posted on the BIGA site and then elsewhere, so we don't need detailed meeting minutes.
Yeah, and I don't want to give the public the impression that we'll be taking any official actions outside of a public meeting.
Oh, and that's not the point. The point is that the Open Meetings Act has a deadline for posting minutes, and if you're going to do that, and virtually no public bodies are meeting that deadline because they say we meet a month from now and we can't approve our minutes until we meet next. So I'm trying to figure out a way that we can comply with the statute. because it would be a good example.
Well, as long as we're posting the video by Monday, we'll be in compliance and video's turned around pretty quickly.
I don't see anyone voting against the adoption of the video evidence, so.
No. Anything further? Okay, hearing nothing, I would invite any member of the public who wants to speak, please come forward. Just give us your name and let us know if there's anything you wanted added to the agenda, anything you want to say. And if no one present wants to come forward, please send any comments you have to open@dc.gov or go to open.dc.gov and follow the links on how to comment. Floor is open. Seeing no takers, it's a motion to adjourn on the floor.
I second. Third.
All in favor?
Aye.
No one's opposed. This meeting stands adjourned at 2:35 p.m.
Meeting, Mr. Chair.